we decided to send out a poll to about 600 Wyoming voters, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, all of them.
Okay.
The reason why is because there's just we're facing a lot of challenges right now, budgetarily, economically, and what we want to get a feel for is what do average people want? What do they expect from their legislators, and what do they think they should do about this crisis?
Right.
And we got a lot of interesting results. And in terms of tax policy and in terms of how we should deal with the budget, they found that 65% actually completely would actually favor if their legislators promised to not to raise any taxes whatsoever. That was a big surprise.
What I would love to see people do is get a hold of, if they want their representative to sign that pledge, call the guy and say, if you want my vote, you're signing.
Yeah.
If he gets enough calls on that, he'll sign.
Yeah. And another interesting thing we found is that a rather large majority of Wyomingites actually are against Medicaid expansion.
Wow.
And what's interesting is we found that a clear majority are against Medicaid expansion. But if you tell the people that support Medicaid expansion if they would still support it if it raised their taxes, then 58% of the respondents actually oppose it. So this shows that Wyoming voters and taxpayers actually clearly understand the trade-offs that are involved with Medicaid expansion. It's not free money. It has to come from us, the taxpayers. And they don't think it's a good deal at all.
You know, in most cases, not in every case, but in most cases, people have a pretty good understanding of what's going on. But what kills me, though, is they still, when you see the way they vote and what they vote for, it tends to go against their understanding. I've never understood the disconnect on that. Or to do so, I've been encouraging people lately to do one of the things I just said to you, especially in a small state in Wyoming. If there's something going on, mainly during an election year, and you don't like what's going on, well, who's the candidate that you support? Get a hold of that person and let them know. If you want my vote, that's how we control these people.
It's typically harder to do that in other states or even nationally, because what politicians will always do. They'll conjure up this idea of there are these other people that we can tax. There are these wealthy people, these wealthy corporations we can tax. In this economic climate in Wyoming, people know that other person, that other corporation just isn't there. We rely on a few resources to fund our schools, provide jobs, and just keep the lights on, more or less. Revenue from all three of those is getting hit hard, and people understand that. And I think what people realize in this, and another thing we found is that people would very much oppose new taxes because they know that that's going to hit the average person the most.
Especially during a downturn. We're in a bit of a downturn in Wyoming. You don't raise taxes now.
Oh, absolutely not. No, if you want to keep people here, if you want to bring innovators here and job producers and job creators and businesses, you don't put a giant sign up that says we're going to take more of your money. That's never worked before.
Okay. Did you have anything else in that poll?
What we found, I'm just taking a look at it right now. What we found, another thing is people think that 50% actually, when it comes to how we should deal with this budget crisis, a clear majority thinks we should cut wasteful spending.
Yeah.
And so I think people really understand that there was a lot of bloat in there, and that we shouldn't, to address this crisis, we just shouldn't keep throwing more money on the pyre.
Right. Let me give you, and I'm just going to put this bug in your ear because you're closer being there in Cheyenne. One of my pet peeves, and I was confronted with it yet again today, and boy, we could save a lot of money on this. So apparently, there's a proposal, I don't know if it'll go through, but where I am in Gillette, Wyoming, they want to get rid of their current visitor center, which is a little building, and they want to build a near $1 million visitor center. And this is another push for this kind of stuff. All right. I would love to see someone finally explain, not just to the governor, but people in the House and Senate. I know it's harder to explain to people at the city level because, like in Wright, Wyoming, They were convinced that visitor center was just going to help expand the city of Wright. Well, of course, it doesn't. My family has been in for the whole time I was a kid. We were in the tourism industry. The visitor centers barely worked back in that age, and that was before the internet. Today, everybody's on the phone. If you're traveling cross-country, across the state, you're on your phone to get information. So if you want to save a lot of money across the state, budget-wise, a great answer is, and a lot of cities are going to get mad at this, just start closing down these visitor center. Nobody's visiting them anymore. They barely did before. Get on those phones, and getting on those phones costs a whole lot less than building another multi-million-dollar visitor center.
Of course. I think people can understand this if they're actually properly educated on this issue. If you went to them and said, look, revenue is down, there's only a few sorts of programs and projects we could fund. We could fund a visitor center that nobody uses and is pretty expensive, or we could patch those potholes. We could make sure there's more law enforcement on the streets to keep our communities safe.
Yeah.
And once people realize that there are trade-offs, then they can start to be proactively involved in the conversation and start to actually have a much more informed say over, these are things that are important, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that we really don't need. Another thing I wanted to say about this poll, we found that about 61% of Wyoming voters consider the government wasteful in some way. 46% consider it somewhat wasteful, and 15% consider it very wasteful.
Yeah.
So people see a lot of this waste in their daily lives. A lot of this just got piled up when the money was coming in, but we really can't afford to keep throwing money at programs that just aren't doing that much good.
Right. Well, and there's also, it depends on what you want to define as waste, because, yes, there are wasteful programs, obviously. But in my book, wasteful, not just the visitor center, but for God's sakes, quit buying the damn statues and putting them everywhere. There's all sorts of wasteful things that government does like that. I even take a look at what they're trying to do and renovate the Capitol. I know the Capitol needs some work. You want to talk wasteful spending. So we see it in a lot of areas that people don't tend to classify as wasteful. I've been complaining for a long time here in Gillette, the field of broke, as I call it. We just don't need the thing. It's wasteful spending. People look at it as it's community improvement. It's a massive money pit is what it is. It's wasteful spending.
That's a whole other category. There is doing things that should be done in an expensive way, in an improper way, in an inefficient way. Then there are those things, like you said, those statues that you mentioned, or those visitor centers. They just shouldn't be done at all.
Right. Why isn't, you mentioned Medicaid expansion here, and the majority of people don't want it. Sure. How is it? It's like a horror movie. Every time we put a stake in the damn thing, you start the characters of the horror movie start to walk away. Well, I'm glad the creature's finally dead, and here it is again. How does it keep coming back?
There's a lot of money behind it. The hospitals support it. I've heard that Blue Cross Blue Shield supports it. Healthy Wyoming, which is a group, a consortium of a lot of established business and public sector groups. They all have this money behind it, and it's the idea. And I think this is just a really weird idea that there are easy solutions to complex problems.
Yeah,
healthcare is an extremely complex problem. It did not get this expensive and this messed up overnight. But the federal government has come in and said, hey, guys, we have this huge problem, and it's so simple to fix. Just take this money and take our rules and just forget about it.
And what they don't understand is that, look at all this money they're going to throw at us. Well, taking that money is going to cause you to go broke when you take a look at the way they're going to give it to you.
Yeah, they could just look at hospitals in other states. They could look at doctors in other states and see how they're being reimbursed and how they're actually being hurt by expanding this entitlement. It's not free money. It has a lot of strings attached, and pretty soon the federal government is going to be pulling back on those strings, but the responsibility to keep taking care of those people will still be there. This is the way it always works. They offer to a big program, lots of promises, and then they slowly but surely take away their end of the bargain, and then we're left holding the bag.
Well, and they have to, because we're coming up on $20 trillion in debt. They simply don't have it. You write about this kind of stuff extensively. Where do people find you?
They can go to wyliberty.org.